is what type of forum is there, what type of protections are in that space. And as you can see, there are 3 categories of public space. This is going to be a First Amendment overview in the most basic sense. So traditional public forum, designated public forum, and the non-public forum. So the first one, traditional public forum, right? And you can see that quote there, from time immemorial, these have been held in the trust for the use of the public land. That is the classic quote of when something is deemed to be a traditional public forum. And so sidewalks are most often identified as traditional public forums. I always thought that courthouse steps were as well. I've learned that's not true, unfortunately. And even the Supreme Court has had certain cases they've ruled upon saying that the steps in front of the Supreme Court are not traditional public forums. All right, so what is a designated public forum? That's a place that the government designates for free speech activity. Now they can do it as a limited or an unlimited. Obviously the unlimited ones are the ones where everything goes as far as expressive speech activity. They can't tell you that you can't be there. Perhaps they can put a time limit on it as far as hours, but in an unlimited designated public forum, free speech activity is welcome. In a limited designated public forum, all free speech activity is not welcome. And the case I cite there is one around Lincoln Center, which is a arts location. It was an area that I believe the Rockefellers donated to the city of New York in order to help push arts and culture in the city of New York, and they created Lincoln Center there. It also happens to be where Fordham Law School is. Proud graduate, 1990. So there was a leafletting I think by union workers from hotel employees in Lincoln Center who were told, nope, you guys cannot be here, you cannot participate in your expressive speech activity. And there was a lawsuit that was brought by some incredibly good activist lawyers, civil rights lawyers, and in fact they lost. And they were told that this is a restricted, designated public forum, and so it's limited. And if you have a music performance, because it's an arts and culture center, that was allowed, but not political expressive speech. When we talked a few minutes ago about Reverend Billy and his protest at 9/11 Plaza, that's a designated public forum, but a limited one. The non-public forum. These are public places that are neither traditionally used for expressive activity nor set aside or allowed for expressive activity. And here are 3 cases that I've cited just to give ideas of whether a public space or non-public space, how courts have said these, in fact, are not traditional public forums. Expressive speech activity can be restricted there. Time, place, and manner restrictions. So everybody understands that the First Amendment is not a unlimited, unqualified right. We can all have First Amendment rights, but we can also have restricted First Amendment rights. There can be qualifications placed on them, and these have become known as the time, place, and manner restrictions. We've all studied this a little bit in law school. So what are the basic rules of the time, place, and manner restrictions? And these are things you might want to know if you're trying to go protest and the police are trying to stop you and you think you're right. You've looked into this. This is a traditional public forum. What the police are doing seems to be an improper time, place, and manner restriction. Use those terms. When you're having the conversation with the police on the scene, use those terms. And if you know these factors, the regulation must be content neutral. You know, officer, I saw the police protesting here just last week. If the police are allowed to protest here, we're allowed to protest here because it has to be content neutral. It must be narrowly tailored to serve a significant government interest, and it must leave open ample alternative channels for communicating the speaker's message. So the second one, the narrow tailoring, seems to be the one that gives the government the most difficulty in litigation. So if you're litigating a time, place, and manner restriction, I urge you to focus on the second factor. For my purposes, I sometimes think that the third factor is often forgotten, especially with sidewalk protests, and we're litigating that issue right now in the city of New York. If you are protesting or your clients are protesting on the sidewalk, and the police come up to you and say, you guys are blocking the sidewalk, it's too crowded, you can't be here, you got to disperse. According to this time, place, and manner restriction, they must give your clients an ample alternative channel for communication. Officer, where should they go? What ample alternative channel are you giving my clients when you're giving them a dispersal order? Now, if the police officer looks at you sideways and ignores you, there's not much you can do. You know, if your clients want to get arrested and have you challenge this in court, have at it. If your clients want to go home that night and have dinner with their family, they're going to leave even if their rights are being violated. What other restrictions are often applied to protests? You have the noise limitations. Is this a residential or is this a commercial space? Is this the weekend or is it the weekday? Is it at night or is it in the morning? So I'll give you an example that there's obviously a lot of international consulates in the city of New York. Some of them are UN delegate consulates, some of them just various countries' consulates, and that there's been a number of protests in front of certain consulates, but the consulates are not designated in one area that is all consulate area. They are just a brownstone in this one block that has residential apartments in the rest of the buildings around it. So there's been litigation over whether or not protests can be restricted there because people are protesting in front of the consulate, and the courts come down on the idea this is still a residential area, so protests can be restricted. It's not saying that it can be canceled completely. It's a sidewalk, it's a traditional public forum, but they can place a time, place, and manner restriction on the noise or on the timing of the noise because of the residential nature of the block. Sidewalk versus street protest. This is another one that I'm often fall on the sidewalk side of the protest. And the reason for this is because you don't need a permit for the sidewalk. Sidewalks, parks, they are traditional public forums. Oftentimes in parks, the same type of rules apply. We have in New York City something called privately owned public space. Again, Occupy Wall Street was a master at utilizing privately owned public space because in the privately owned public space, it was considered a traditional public forum where the rules applied as if it was a sidewalk. And so when your clients are deciding whether to take the street, you've got to let them know that streets may be considered a traditional public forum, but a permit requirement with limitations are always going to be considered a proper time, place, and manner restriction. So, these are rules that you need to look at, and you need to make decisions or help your clients understand that sidewalk protest, a lot easier, street protest, permits required. What are you trying to do? One of the other things I like to express, there's a current commissioner, chief of police over in Burlington, Vermont, is a former inspector of the NYPD who I've come to know. And he had a protest on the streets of Burlington about a year ago that were about gun violence coming out of the University of Vermont. Students were protesting and blocking streets in downtown Burlington during rush hour on a Friday. And he allowed that protest to continue. He liaised with the protesters. He didn't make any arrests. He didn't take any enforcement action. And he allowed it to continue for about an hour until it ended on its own. And he took some heat from the public about why he would allow the protesters to block the street and impact everyone's commute to come home that day. And he issued a press release expressing why the First Amendment should be valued and that at certain times the streets can be taken. It's not something that he would have allowed if this was a protest that happens annually. But because this was a big moment in time about gun rights and about gun restriction in this country, he felt it was a very important use of the First Amendment. Protest lawyering Part 2, arrest in the criminal court. Okay, so someone's been arrested. Are they getting issued a summons or a desk appearance ticket, or are they going to be held overnight?